Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Good Vibes podcast. I am super stoked about today's guest, Erin Lanahan. Erin Lanahan is a spiritual life coach, a love warrior, a peace soldier, an author, and an international yoga teacher. Erin, it's so great to have you on here. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much. I love hearing that in that introduction. That was awesome. Thank you. I'm great. Yeah, I'm feeling really good. I'm excited to connect with you and see where this goes.
Awesome. You know, I got into spiritual life coach, love warrior, peace soldier, author, international yoga teacher. How and why did you end up doing this type of work?
Yeah, totally. That's such a good question. Well, it's so funny because in business, I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to this. We're told that we have to niche ourselves and, find a label, for what it is that you do. And for me, that's very challenging, to find a name to call what it is that I do. So I just have fun with it. I just want to have fun with it. And I want it to feel good, when I tell people what I do. So basically, in a nutshell, how I arrived in this, spiritual life coach, peace warrior, love soldier, is that I had gone through a period in my life where things were not working out. Like nothing was working out. It was not long after I graduated from college, and when I went into college, I was really aware that they asked me to tick a box, right, of what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I'm 18 years old and I'm thinking, how in the heck does anyone know what the heck they want to do for the rest of their lives? I don't even know who I am. But I did my best to tick that box and to move forward in the way that we're supposed to. And when I graduated from college, I felt this longing inside of me. I knew that there was something that I was meant to go explore, some adventure that I was meant to have. And I would go to my cubicle every single day, my 9-to-5 job. And, there's nothing wrong with 9-to-5 jobs. There was a lot of room for me to grow there. But for me personally, it was I was dying every day. Every day that I went there, I knew that it wasn't where I was supposed to be. So I set my eyes on Los Angeles, and that's where I went. And we could get into many, many details about that journey in LA, and happy to do that if you're curious. But basically what happened was I got to LA and I basically came face to face with myself, and it was all of the things, a lot of things that I was curious about, spirituality and, how do we cultivate this thing called happiness, and what is that even, but many dark nights of the soul and many days and nights of me going through the opposite of that, which sort of had me asking these really big questions. And it had me exploring that there must be a better way, so I began to really explore what would that be? If there were a better way, what would that be? And I wasn't really I was never religious, and I didn't have a specific, any kind of spirituality in my life at the time, but I did believe that there was something at work bigger than me. So I began to just pray. I began to just pray for guidance, and I knew that I needed help. And that's when my very first coach came into my life, and she taught me, a lot of things, but it was my first real spiritual teacher and mentor and guide. And I basically turned my life around. I did a 360. I had struggled a lot with substance abuse. I had struggled a lot with just, body image problems, bad relationship with food, no self-love, that kind of stuff. And, when you're living in that place within yourself, the decisions you make, they reflect that. So they take you down these really kind of dangerous roads. And sometimes we make it out and sometimes we don't. And I was lucky enough, blessed enough to, I guess, start asking of what, there's got to be a better way, and really started to, let myself explore what that would be. And then when you do that, the right people, places, and things start to show up. And that's what led me to going to school to become a coach, and then really realizing that I wanted to work with people who were in my same situation to help them, discover that there was a better way, and how to navigate through those dark nights of the soul.
Yeah, I know what those dark nights are all about. I've hit rock bottom a couple times in my life. I've been broke a couple times in my life. I've been fat. I've been fat and broke. There's not much worse than that at the same time. So how do you take those rock bottoms, and how do they lead to self-love? I've heard you talk about that before. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I think the key thing is rock bottom, as you're mentioning. Unfortunately, like as a coach, but also as somebody who's been there, I know that until you get to that place where you literally hit rock bottom, you're not willing. There's not enough willingness to change your ways. There's not enough willingness to allow in a different way of thinking or to hit your knees and pray. We have so much resistance to that stuff until we hit rock bottom, and it's kind of this miracle, in disguise, that like there's only one choice left, and that's to surrender. So for me, part of that process was like, for example, I struggled a lot with my physical body, was very identified with it. Like my self-worth depended on how I looked and what the scale said that I weighed. And I was actually struggling with my relationship with food at the time, and doing this whole like binging on food, and then going and doing like 3 hours of exercise, and kind of going through this really toxic relationship with food, and shaming myself all the time. If I binged, it was like, oh, the shame was so great that I wouldn't let myself really go out in public, because I just could feel like people could see that I was a mess, that I was falling apart. So I just started to hit my knees. I started to pray. I started to ask for help. I started to look things up online. I started to do a lot of kind of journaling. My life coach came into my life, my spiritual teacher. And it just became obvious. It just became obvious that the first place that I needed to start was self-love, because everything was like, when I get this thing, when I look like this, when I achieve this, then I'll be able to love myself. And those things weren't happening. So it's like, I couldn't love myself because those things weren't happening. That is such a painful place to live. When you don't love yourself, and you think, and you're reaching outside of yourself for people, places, and things because you think that that's going to make you feel good about who you are, it is a painful place to be. So the only relief for me was to actually begin to contemplate on this new paradigm, which was, if I love myself first and I align myself with that vibration, then everything else will begin to shift and match that. And it was like this very new concept for me. But again, I had tried everything else. Like I tried to discipline my way into it. I tried to force my way into it, and it was just getting worse. It was just getting worse. So, that's sort of how it started for me, was just realizing that I had done everything else. The only thing that I hadn't done was actually worked on my relationship with myself. And I had never considered that had I, if I had done that first, that then everything that I wanted in my life would just kind of naturally come because of it. So for me, it felt like relief. Like, oh my God, this feels like a huge relief to me, because there's nothing I have to do except for align myself with this vibration of self-love. And so what would that take? Like, what would that feel like to really love myself exactly as I am in this moment? Like, and if I could do that, then I would be free, So that's what happened, was I just wanted that freedom so badly. And it became obvious that that was the only way for me to have it.
Yeah, it seems like people get it all backwards. They say, well, give me the relationship, give me the job, give me the career, give me the house, and then I'll be happy. But it doesn't work that way. You have to get happy first and get on that vibration level, and then everything else will come to match that level. And I remember I took one of your classes a couple years ago, and you spoke a lot about how it's important to focus on the feelings instead of the outcomes. What are some ways to do that, to get people into the habit of doing that instead of the outcomes?
Oh, God, I love this topic so much. I really do. I was having a conversation about this with a really good friend earlier today, because I just feel like it's such a trap, for all of us. And it's part of our conditioning that we think that once I get this and this and this and this, then that will equal this way that I want to feel. And so we're so focused on the thing and the container and the package that it comes in. And then most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time we get it and we're like, it's not like matching how we don't feel how we thought we would. So, and I think that for me, that happened so many times that I finally just was like, okay, that doesn't work. So, there are so many different ways, to really cultivate that feeling inside of us. But I think some really simple ways to start are just asking the question, like, what is the thing that I'm really wanting, right? So here's this, we'll say marriage, it's marriage or family or more money or whatever it is. Okay, so that's great. Like, what's the why? What's the why behind it? What is the thing that you think that is going to give you, And it might be something like, my heart will be full, or I'll finally feel complete, or, I'll feel like my life matters, or whatever that is. So it's like, you just keep digging. Okay, well, what would it take for your heart to be full now? What would it take for you to feel like there's purpose and meaning in your life now? What needs to shift or change so that you can feel complete, like, and whole and radiant now? And then it's like, as we start to ask those questions, as you and I both know, like, this really magical thing, we open up this dialogue with the universe, spirit, whatever you want to call it, and all of a sudden you start getting, things start showing up. And it's kind of like, you're on this trail and you ask these questions, and then a little sign gets placed in front of you, and then you take that direction, and then a little bit more. And so that's how I think that, you can really begin. I think a lot of times too is like, we don't really know what happiness feels like. We focus so much on, I want to be happy, and I want to be happy, and I want to be happy. Well, let's take a moment to just pause. Like, what does happiness feel like? Like, let's just feel it in our body. Let's bring our attention to, like, what is that? Is your heart tingling? Or do you feel expansive? Do you feel really grounded in your body? What is the feeling of happiness? So I think that's another practice I do a lot with my clients, is just really releasing the labels and sort of the names of things, the conditioning, and getting more focused on, like, what is the vibe? Like, what's the vibration of that, in your body? And then it's like things like sadness or grief. We those feelings are actually wonderful, but if we have a judgment on those feelings, right? Because sadness is bad and anger is bad, it prevents us from actually being able to feel it in our bodies, which is a whole other topic. But so that's kind of where I would sort of start with all that, is just like, let's do a little discovery detective work and get underneath why we're wanting things, and then let's feel it in our bodies.
It's awesome. I love that. I'm completely obsessed with raising my vibration and techniques for it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that have no idea that the law of attraction is working constantly, whether you'd like it or not. It's either working in your favor or working against you. And that vibes are real. If you get a bad vibe from somebody, we're always giving off a vibration of positivity or perhaps negativity, depending on how we feel. And I'm so obsessed with trying to keep my vibration as high as possible. Do you have any daily practices that we can implement in order to do that and keep us in that high state, that high frequency?
Mm-hmm. I love this question too, because this was one that I was like really asking for a long time, and I think with the law of attraction, what can happen is that we can end up with some fear in us, because we're afraid to be a low vibration, or we're afraid to be out of alignment, or whatever it is. So what I have experienced in my own self, in my own being, and what I see with my clients that seems to be what is the most effective in transformation and, like releasing old limiting stuff, is self-love, and mindfulness. So I know for me, it's a practice. It's a practice in acknowledging that I'm maybe not feeling so great, acknowledging why, that I'm not feeling so great. But if I can acknowledge that with curiosity, if I can acknowledge that with genuine compassion for myself, if I can acknowledge that with gentleness and kindness, and I can say, like, oh, okay, I noticed that there's something that I'm processing at the moment, that, because sometimes with vibration, like it has to do with our thoughts, but sometimes there's an energy in our body that we need to actually process, because it's the energy in our body that creates the vibration. So like if we have an old wound or something from our childhood, that is getting triggered in a situation, we're going to be feeling that. So there's definitely a practice in getting into the body and sort of helping ourselves integrate and process energy and sort of old things that are there. But it's also like we're going to slip away from it. We're going to go up and down. We're going to ebb and flow. It's just part of it. So it's just like in meditation practice, when you sit still and then you notice your mind starts to wander, like we don't want to beat ourselves to bring it back. We just want to say, oh, isn't that interesting? My mind just wandered. Let me just kindly bring it back. Just kindly come back to the breath. So for me, it's the same way of like every moment I have a choice. And the practice is, how am I going to respond to what's happening? So if I've moved into a really crappy, low vibe place, okay, let me just see that. Let me be grateful that I'm aware, that I'm actually acknowledging and able to see that I've just moved into this feeling that doesn't feel so good. And then what do I need in this moment? Maybe I need a hug. Maybe I need a moment. Maybe I need a nap. Maybe I need a glass of water. Maybe I need to call a friend. And then just lovingly nourishing myself back into that high vibe, right? And sometimes we need like a quick shift. We need a quick, fast shift. And there are tools for that too. I love Access Consciousness because boom, you can ask a question and it just shifts you immediately to that thing. So, I think with everybody, it's so bio-individual, and it's like we get all these fun tools and you get to put them in your toolbox, and then you get to like decide which one you want to pick up, in the moment based on where you're at. But that's sort of just in a nutshell how I would describe, how to come back into that high vibe feeling is, I think our vibration is really the most affected by how we're responding, to the situation at hand, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned Access Consciousness. I got to share a story. Twice in the past year, I asked, what's it going to take for $40,000 to show up in my life? I needed it for, recently I moved and I needed money for furniture and all kind of stuff. And a little while back, I needed it for other stuff. And both times, just by asking the question, what is it going to take for $40,000 to show up in my life? I got 30. I never got 40 each time, but I got like 33. I got the same amount each time. It was like 33, something around there. But it's amazing. So tell us a little bit about Access Consciousness and living in the question and why that's important.
I love hearing stories like that. I love hearing stories like that too. And I really love that. I even love that you're like, you asked and you kind of got into the energy of more money. And like, if we really were to dive into your story, you were probably really feeling that in your body, and there's other tools out there too. Like we can bring in like this thing called upper limit, upper limiting, or I think that's what they call it. And so we can kind of look at sometimes where we are unable to sort of reach a level beyond. But again, that's another topic. So as far as Access Consciousness goes, I love this because there's nothing we have to do. There's like, for me, there is a lot of relief in like, there's like not anything that I have to do. I don't have to know the answer to the question. That's actually not up to me. It's more like having the willingness to do the practice of asking the question. Like, what would it take for blank to show up in my life right now? And then, so it kind of opens up that dialogue, between us and that like bigger us, or the universe, or God, or spirit, whatever you want to refer to that as. And then what happens is like we send that signal out of like, what would it take? And then sometimes all it takes is asking the question and the thing shows up. And other times you get shown that like, oh, like in like really roundabout ways, like, oh, like this over here needs to be tweaked, or this over here needs to be tweaked, or you get this idea, like maybe I should call this person and talk about this idea that I have, or you just write something inspiring on Facebook and somebody's like, hey, I want to work with you. You know what I mean? And so it's really interesting. So for me, and here's that like word surrender again, like it's being willing to ask the question and then in a playful way, just be like, ooh, I'm excited to see what happens, and having like, it's another practice in sort of letting go of what it looks like or when it shows up, and just being committed to the practice, just being committed to the practice of showing up and asking the questions and letting go, and showing up and asking the questions and letting go, and then responding with curiosity and responding with almost like a childlike curiosity, a playfulness, a lightness, a real gentleness. That's what I love about it, you know, is it's really taught me how to just be curious again, you know. I think I lost that as an adult. Like, I was such a curious child. Like, had a reputation for asking way too many questions, you know. And then it's like we get in the habit of asking lots of questions, but like the wrong questions. Like, what if this happens to me? And what if I fail? And what if it doesn't work out? What if I get rejected? And like, we're always asking questions, you know. So how about we ask questions that are actually going to create something that we want, you know, like shift us into that possibility. Well, I guess they all shift us into possibility. It's just like, well, they're both possible. Like, which one do you want to focus on? You know? So, yeah, I think it just also, I think for me, access consciousness it's helping us reclaim our power as a creator in our life, and remembering that this world is our playground. And yes, there's divine timing. And yes, there's a greater plan unfolding. We don't have control over everything that happens, but we can be an active participant.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's also about not limiting your possibilities, because when you're in the answer, you think that you have the answer, and it cuts off possibilities to everything else.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's huge. I'm so glad you brought that up, because you're so right. And I had a coach that used to say, like, here's like the known. Most of us are kind of living in this circle, and this is everything that we know. But then there's like the land of possibility that's out here. But because we've never experienced it or seen it, we don't even know what it's called, it's really hard to be like, yeah, I want that thing, because you don't know it exists. So it's like the question kind of opens us up to what's out here and sort of moves us beyond like what's just in here. And I've really, really seen that, like really been like, what would it take for this thing to show up in my life? And your mind starts going, well, how's that going to happen? You know, because based on my past, I can't see how that would happen. And it's like, well, I don't need to know how it's going to happen. You know, how's it going to feel when it does happen? You know? So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
That's a great analogy. I also really like how does it get any better than this? Yeah. When good things happen to people, they say to themselves, it can't get any better than this. And when you say that, that's it. It's going to end right there. And it's fun, because when you get on a roll with it, how's it get any better than this? You want to talk about that for a minute?
Totally.
You love that as much as I do?
I mean, because I'm just like you, like I'm such a student with all this stuff, you know, and I'm like a kid in a candy shop, like, ooh, let me try this question and that one. And yeah, I love that. I love that. How does it get any better than this? Because it just like you feel it kind of open you up when something happens that's really good. And then like, I think a lot of us, I don't know, I know for me, I've been really, really aware that when good things happen for me, there's kind of like this, I don't know, like this, it's really challenging for me to fully receive it, you know, fully receive it. And I even have noticed feelings come up for myself of like, I feel indulgent for getting this good thing, or I feel like I'm not worthy of this good thing. And that's really interesting to notice. And I think that's what they refer to as kind of our upper limit. You know, we sort of have this place where we feel safe to receive, and then anything beyond that, we have all this stuff that kind of makes it too hard, you know, to receive more. So I love that question because it kind of bypasses all that. You know, it just bypasses all of those things. And I know for me, that question might even just bring awareness to the fact that, hey, it hasn't been able to get any better than this up to this point because you didn't realize that you had these beliefs about not being worthy, or, you know, feeling guilty or feeling indulgent. Now you can address those feelings, and now it can get better. It can get even better, you know, than this. Because I think it's important to be able to acknowledge that there is discomfort around more, because that'll be a reason unconsciously why we don't allow ourselves to create more, because it feels really uncomfortable, you know. So I love those questions because for me, they help me bypass all that.
Yeah, it seems like limiting beliefs are a common problem with everybody. Everyone's got their own limiting beliefs. I have mine. I'm aware of them. I try to crash through them. When you find a limiting belief about yourself, other than access consciousness, are there any other ways that you can diffuse that situation?
Yeah. So a lot of the work that I do with people is body work. And it's hard to explain, like, because it's kind of something that you have to experience, but I'll do my best. So like as a coach, I look for patterns, and I do this in my own life too. So I look for things that are reoccurring, things that are showing up kind of over and over again. Or if the client is speaking in a certain kind of way, and like I'll feel their contraction or their they're that restrictive, constricted feeling where they're sort of closing off, to possibilities, or they've already decided, what's possible or what's not possible. So it takes a little bit of detective work in that moment. And even when I'm working with just myself, of sort of getting to the root of like, what is that belief that has you shutting yourself off from, whatever it is you're wanting to create or receive. So, and then we have to sometimes we have to address it. We've got to just get into the body where that child at 5 years old or whatever it was made a decision that it wasn't safe to be noticed. It wasn't safe to be successful. It wasn't safe to be big light. It was safer to play small. It was safer to hide. It was safer to be wallpaper, and this is just one example of how this can kind of play out. So it's like getting back into that place where we kind of made that agreement that it's just safer to live like this, and therefore, and we don't even know we did that. So it's getting into the body and just being able to in a safe way, really process that, feel that, see that, reframe it in more of an energetic way. You're actually, when you're in there, there's an intelligence, a really powerful intelligence that lives in your being. So when you're connecting to that, it starts to show you things, and answers start to emerge from within you. You get kind of what I like to call downloads, like a computer, information starts to download, and then before you know it, you sort of have that aha moment, which kind of shifts you. And a lot of times it shifts you once and for all. And sometimes, you got to work at something for a little while, but I've seen amazing things happen. I mean, with clients that I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to, I don't know if this person's going to be able to, but even those people blow my mind, what happens when they start to do this work.
That's great. And that class I took with you a couple years ago, and you've mentioned surrender a lot. And I got to be honest with you right now, I really had a hard time grasping that when you were teaching that to me. And I think it was because I didn't really understand. I was confusing it for surrender as to give up, when in actuality, you were speaking of something different. And I'm a little more mature now, and looking back on that, I really had a tough time with that. But I think a lot of people don't understand that concept. Could you dig into that a little bit with surrender?
Totally. So this topic is sometimes challenging to talk to people about because it requires some kind of faith in order to be able to do it. So if people are resistant to faith because, they're resistant to God or spirit or universe or whatever it is, then for me, I have to find a way that they can have faith in something, right? Because it's that thing that when you're a kid, that trust game you play with your friends of fall back and trust that someone's going to catch you. It's got to be out of your hands. I'm going to do my part, and I'm going to trust that the thing is going to appear, the nut's going to appear, that I'm going to be caught. So if you don't trust that there's a thing that's going to catch you, it's really almost impossible to surrender. So for me, surrender, the first step is faith. Even in recovery programs and 12-step recovery programs, the first step in that recovery for people is just being able to see that their life has been unmanageable up until that point, so they can just admit to themselves that whatever they were doing wasn't working. And then as you move through, and then step 2 is about really being able to see that it's going to take something bigger than you to restore you to sanity, and so but you can only see that because you look back at how you've been living your life and you realize okay, I obviously don't know how this works, So for me, that is surrender of, okay, I have to be able to trust that I am not doing this all on my own. And surrender is about it. So if you think about a yoga class, you go to yoga and you move your body and you do your thing, right? You show up, you do your part. And then we lay down in Shavasana. And in Shavasana, there's no more doing. There's simply just being. And Shavasana teaches us that there comes a time where you have to now just receive and trust the process. So all you can do is you can show up, you can do your part, take guided action, tune in, take guided action, connect to something bigger than you, and then you gotta let go. You gotta put the doing down, you gotta put the effort down, and you just gotta trust the process. You gotta trust the timing of the process. And that's why we have all these practices. Like, okay, like it's easy to say, trust the process and trust the divine timing, right? But if you don't have faith, that's hard. However, as you probably can relate to this, once you start to experience that in your life, it gets easier. And then you know it works because it worked once before, then it worked twice before, or 3 times before, and then you're like, okay, there's something to this. But before you have that kind of, as they would call it, like that kind of a spiritual experience or awakening or whatever, yeah, up until that point, it's called blind faith. It's called, I'm willing to do this thing called blind faith because I've tried everything else and I am in pain. I think that's why surrender only comes to those who hit like serious rock bottom.
Yeah, and then also when you're not surrendering, you're actually creating resistance to what you want and making it virtually impossible to get there.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and that's a great point that you bring up, because it's kind of like, I know for me, if I'm feeling really bad, it's usually because I'm in deep resistance about something. Like I'm just like, I'm resisting something. So the question is always like, what am I resisting right now?
Yeah. So when it comes to spirit, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, and connecting to the soul, why is that so important?
Yeah. This is actually what my book is about, connecting. In the book, I'm really talking more about connecting with yourself, because I want to kind of put it into a language that a large mass of people can receive. And that'll work too. If you call it connecting to yourself, that can work as well. So was your question, why is that important?
Yeah, connecting to your soul.
Okay. So this is just in my experience, in my experience, therefore, this is I guess you could say my opinion. And what I've seen with countless clients, even the ones who refused to believe in anything like that. And I come from that. Like, I couldn't even say the G word for so long. I was like, God, I was like, ugh, I couldn't say that word. And I was really anti-religion, but I had a curiosity, and I believed in magic and miracles. And I believed that there was something mystic at hand. So for me personally, I couldn't, as you said, earlier today, I couldn't turn my life around until that came into my life, because I had tried everything. I had seriously tried everything. And I believe that it was the hand of something bigger than me, spirit, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, the energy of love, stepping in, grace, stepping into my life, which for me, my path really started when I met my coach and then moved on into recovery. So for me, part of my path was recovery. I would have never been able to do that if something hadn't stepped in, and it's hard to explain. So for me, the reason why it's important is that if we don't have that connection to something more than just this mental place, then it's hard to know what comes next. So all we're ever doing is we're making decisions based on what has happened in the past and based on avoiding what we're afraid of in the future. Right? So that's how we make decisions. That's not a good way to make decisions, because it's run by fear, and all you're trying to do is avoid the things that you don't want to experience instead of focusing on what you do want to experience. So when you have that connection to something bigger than yourself, it allows you to, there's a saying in recovery, they say you will intuitively know how to handle things which used to baffle you. So it's like, what starts to happen is you start to be guided. There's a way that's why I say you take guided action, right? We don't just take any action, because sometimes that creates more chaos and it creates more wreckage and it creates more mess. We want to take guided action. We want to take inspired action. And that comes from when you're connected to source, whatever that is for you, that deeper intelligence, that deeper wisdom, that basically it's a knowing of like, this is the next right step. Not like, oh, let me try to figure out what the next right step is because I am trying to not recreate that. And I'm trying not to, I'm trying to avoid this thing I'm afraid of in the future. You feel the difference. Like there's such a different like vibration to those two ways of operating. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned your book.
Yeah.
What is the big why behind your book? Is it the substance problems? Is it just everything? Or you want to help people?
Yeah.
Why?
All of it. So actually, interestingly enough, I've always known that I was meant to write a book. Like, always felt that in me. I mean, I kind of got to this point in my life of like, oh no, is it going to happen or not? Maybe it's not meant to be. And then I was praying a lot of like, I felt like something was trying to birth itself through me. Like, what is it? What's next? What's next? This is like the perfect example of like when you're connected to something like source, that what happened one day is I got this email from my school that I became a coach at, and they were actually doing a book program. And I just knew as soon as I saw the email, every cell in my being was like, yes, 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 yes. That never happens to me, especially when it comes to like investing money. That's usually like, a challenging decision. It really takes me time to decide. It was like, boom, yes, click, buy. And I just knew, I had no idea. Like, I always had all these ideas about what I could write about, what I'd want to write about, but it was like, how's it all going to come together? And then one day I was doing a module for the program, and I just tuned in and I was like, what is this book? Like, what wants to be written through me? And then big, huge download, like lightning bolt came through, and it was like, oh my God, that's what it is. And I started writing it out. And basically it was the steps that I went through as a person, healing myself and my life, to be able to now have what I like to refer to as like liberation. So much freedom from all the things that held me back, way back when. So when I coach with clients, I take them through these processes and these steps. And not everybody can afford to coach with me. And I certainly can't coach everyone in the world. You know what I mean? So this is a way for me to access more people. This is a way for me to share this, I think, as you said, this information that I feel like when people are ready, because there's people just like you and I out there who are praying for help. They're praying for an answer. They're praying for something. And I imagine my book being that first thing that kind of falls off the shelf, and they're like, and then that sort of embarks, that opens that path up for them. So I see this book is relative for anyone, no matter where they are on their path. But it's because I still use these tools, especially when I'm going through really hard times. I always come back. This is the foundation. But especially for people who are just embarking on this, when you first start out, you know what that was like. I feel like I've given a spiritual toolkit. Like, here's your toolbox. Here you go. Take these steps. And by the end of this book, you are going to have a wicked connection to something bigger than yourself. You're going to be able to trust your intuition, and magical things are going to start happening. So that was my why, behind the book.
That's fantastic. So after people hear this, they fall in love with you and your message, they're going to be clamoring for this book. When is this book coming out? Is it?
Yeah. So right now I'm tuning in. So the book is, I've taken a bit of a detour. So originally I was going to self-publish the book, and I still might. The book is completely done. It's completely written. And I'm just kind of tuning in at this point. My dream is to have this book picked up by a publishing house. So, but right now it feels I'm feeling some stagnation around that. So I would say within the next few months, that book will be in process, either with a self-publisher, which can take really only like about 8 weeks, and then it's done. So I would say, my goal is to have this book published before June, because that will mean that I did it in a year. I did it in 1 year, which to me is like huge, huge, huge big deal, to write a book and have it published in a year. So that's my answer to that. Like, I'm still tuning in and like following the guidance around, like getting picked up by Hay House. That's my goal. And, that could happen before it self-publishes, or it might happen after it self-publishes. So I'm still playing with that at the moment. But I would say within the next 4, 5, 6 months, it'll be out.
Okay.
I'll keep you posted.
What's it going to take to have a publisher pick up the book, right?
Exactly. What's it going to take for Hay House to show up and want to publish my book? Yeah.
And I can totally see, I went to one of those Hay House events recently. I can totally see you up on stage there with your book talking about it. So I see big things for you.
Thank you.
You mentioned a lot about playing and having fun. So I want to talk about that for a minute, because for me, it seems like it all comes back down to having fun and just being happy, and everything just comes into place then. I know you've mentioned it a few times, so it's obviously something that's important to you. Playing, having fun, how do you define that? How do you get into that feeling, that state?
Mm-hmm. Well, another great question. So for me, I was always known as a child of being like so serious. Like I was asking questions when I was like 5 of like, why are we here? And what is life about? And so I have my default setting is like super intense and super serious and super like contemplative and trying to like, decide how life works. So for me, this is another practice of mine. And I love one thing Access Conscious talks about, is follow the lightness. Like, does it feel heavy or does it feel light? So for me, I really appreciate that light feeling, and when I'm in that light feeling, I am accessible. So like creativity can access me, spirit can access me, solutions can access me. When I'm in the heaviness, like it's like they can't get to me. They can't get to me. So I know, finally, because I've lived enough in the other way to know that doesn't work, that every moment is a choice for me. Every single moment is a choice for me. And the only thing that creates momentum and possibility is to stay in that lightness as much as I can, right? So even if I'm processing something really intense and I'm going through something really challenging, because of course that's going to happen, it's like, how can I respond to that in a way that's light, in a way that's loving, in a way that's playful? I like the word playful because it gives me this image of being a child on the playground. It gives me this image of kind of carefree and sort of, there's not a lot of heaviness to things. So it just reminds me, the word playful helps me tap into a feeling in my body, which is this kind of very light, free, feeling. So it's more about that feeling that I'm talking about when I talk about playful. But absolutely, I think that as adults, like one thing that makes me really sad is I think we let growing older in age, kind of hijack our youthfulness, like our childlike curiosity and playfulness and our innocence. And it doesn't have to be that way. I think that for me, I strive to have both, to mature, of course, to evolve, but also to stay connected to that really powerful, like childlike, playful curiosity, because that's the part of me that isn't afraid, to try things, that isn't afraid to fall off the slide, that isn't afraid to, there's not as much fear, so I'm like, how can I grow and how can I evolve, but how can I stay connected to that really like innocent, childlike, because that innocence is only innocent because it's not basing life on the past. And I think as adults, we get so conditioned by our past and the hurts and the things that have happened that it kind of hardens us and we lose that child, and so for me, it just reminds me, that word reminds me, to stay connected to that child.
Yeah, I love watching kids. I have a niece and nephew, and they just run around, they dance, they sing, they scream. They don't care what anybody thinks about them. They're not self-conscious yet. It's great. That's a great state to be in, because fear seems to always be on the other side of what we're trying to do. Fear is always seems to be the problem. Whenever you're trying to move forward with something, it's a fear of something, whether you realize it or not. And how do you deal with fear? Obviously, you experience fear. We're all humans. Do you have a way to tap into that? Do you go to the source? What do you do for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing about fear is like, I mean, some of it's like biological fear, like if there's a bear or something like that, like, okay, that makes sense. That kind of fear, like, yeah, you want to probably run from the bear. You know, you probably don't want to cross the street when there's a ton of traffic, you know, things like that. But yeah, and what you're talking about is like that psychological fear. So for me, it's like, it always, again, like I'm going to bring that word up, practice again. So for me, everything is an opportunity to practice how I respond, you know, to whatever it is I'm feeling or whatever it is that's happening or whatever it is I'm noticing. And the first step is always awareness. You know, it is always to become aware that I am in fear. You know, fear is in the driver's seat right now. Now, for me, just acknowledge that is powerful. Like as soon as I know, then fear is not really in control anymore. That makes sense. Like Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about that in his book, The Power of Now. So I think the first step for people, because so many people operate from fear and they have no idea. They have no idea that fear is what's making their choices. They don't know. So we could get into like how you would wake someone up to that. But for me personally, I have to say, okay, fear's in the driver's seat. And the second step is I am willing to feel differently about this. I am willing to see this differently. Spirit, God, angels, help me see this differently. What would it take for me to see this differently? What would it take for me to be fully aligned with the vibration of trust and faith right now? Because if you don't have faith and you don't have trust, you could ask, what would it take to have faith? What would that feel like? What would that be like to be fully aligned with the vibration of trust and faith, to have that, you know, in my life? So for me, that's how I shift from fear. Yesterday, I was in a lot of fear about something. I was getting really triggered by something that's happening with a friend of mine. And man, it was like really, really, really like had me like in anxiety. Firstly, I realized that I was tired and I needed a nap. I wasn't coping well, you know? So sometimes we're in fear because we're having trouble coping with the intensity of our emotions, or sometimes it's not even ours, it's around us, or we've taken it on from someone else. It's why I love the whole return to sender thing. So yeah, it's definitely a process. It's certainly a process, but I think firstly, it's just being able to acknowledge that I'm in fear, just being able to acknowledge. I think the second step, you know, if one has that level of awareness, like being able to kind of get a little detective-y about it too. I like to follow it through, you know, like what am I afraid of exactly? Like what's the worst case scenario here? And I think for me, when I examine the worst case scenario, I see that actually I would be okay. Like, I think fear is this idea that we won't be able to survive. Like we won't be okay, you know, if this thing happens or whatever. But so it's always like for me realizing that no matter what happens, I will continue to choose to respond in the way that cultivates love and cultivates compassion. And I mean, for as long as I'm on this planet, you know, that's what my choice will be. So regardless of what happens, even if it's painful or sucky in the moment, I'm going to be okay. You know, I'm going to be okay. Now it's easier said than done, right? So I think, you know, that's why we need guides and mentors and things like that sometimes. Because when we really get stuck in that vibration of fear, we sometimes need someone to kind of hold our hand and kind of remind us of the truth and sort of help us shift out of that. So I have help too. I have coaches and my own mentors and guides too.
Yeah, that's great. It's always a fear, and being aware is the first step. I love that. You got to be aware. If you're not aware of it, you don't know what's going on. Yeah. So I want to shift gears here real quick. I actually just started making my bed. I never used to do that. Okay, because I heard about the power of it. It does something to you psychologically when you make your bed. It's like you get the day off to a good start. You've accomplished something, even as minute as that. Do you have a morning routine that you use to get your day going?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I sure do. That's something I talk a lot in my book, is the morning practice. So, okay, firstly, I love that you brought up the whole bed making thing. So that's another thing that they talk a lot about in like different spiritual kind of systems. Just this idea of having the house always sort of prepared in a way that spirit like to honor spirit, like as though it's this ultimate guest, you know, in your home. And that, you know, the more sort of you make your house be a place that it wants to be, like the more it's there. So that's kind of a belief that comes from India and different, you know, different belief systems. But so I know, and even in recovery, they talk about that and they refer to that as an esteemable act. So when we do these very tiny things, you know, that make us feel just good about what we did or who we are, it like builds our self-esteem. For me personally, that's one thing in the morning. Yes, getting the bed, you know, made. And then I go through different phases, but I have different, I like to think of these as like prescriptions, you know, like these are prescriptions that I prescribe myself depending on whatever ailment that is going on at the time, whatever dis-ease that I have, right? And so, but the sort of my go-to is waking up and starting with a journal. So when we're just waking up from our sleep, we have this, like before we do anything, like drink coffee, eat, any of that, we have access to our subconscious, you know, in a way that we don't have access to 10, 15, 20 minutes later. So journaling is powerful anytime. And I'll admit, sometimes I drink my green smoothie and I have my latte and I journal while I'm doing that. And that's still very powerful. But I also love the practice of morning pages, immediately waking up, rolling over to your notebook, getting your pen. You just free flow write for, you know, 3 pages. Front and back is 2 and then another page. And then I'll follow that up with a gratitude list, some access consciousness, some questions, you know, things like that. Because for me, my default setting is like, I can be in a funk, you know, real easy. You know, when I wake up, like, I need to like I need to get right. I just need to get right. Things are messy in there. And I don't exactly know what signals I'm sending off, you know? So for me, like writing helps me get, as soon as I start to write, I can see like, oh, wow, like there's a lot of negativity and fear going on here, you know, and just writing through that. And then it sort of, that awareness gives me the ability to go, I'd really like to shift gears. Like I'd really love to be coming from a place of possibility. And like, and then I'll kind of roll into like, what would that take? You know, what would it take to have a day of ease and grace and flow? You know, what would that be like? What would that feel like? And so every day, you know, that process might look a tiny bit different, but pretty much it's I journal, I get right in my thoughts. You know, I align myself. There's always a bit of prayer involved. You know, I'm always connecting with spirit when I'm writing and calling in assistance. And then, yeah, and then a lot of times the ideas and stuff start to flow from there too. And of course, I always do a green smoothie. I feel like it's really important to really nourish your body in the morning. We drink a big glass of like, you know, lemon water and take all our vitamins. And then, and I love espresso. So that's like my only drug in my life. And so I'll have my latte, and that's I cherish that sacred moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the idea of journaling. I woke up last Saturday and I was having this dream. I was in that dream state, and I needed to be in the speech contest. That was 2 days later, and I dreamt, or maybe I was awake or whatever. I was in that state. I could see the whole thing, and not only winning the contest, I saw all that. I knew exactly what I was going to talk about too. So I got up, I started writing down the things that I was doing in this speech I visualized. And 2 days later, I had it. I went, I won, everything happened. It was absolutely amazing.
Amazing.
So when you journal, do you start writing, you said sometimes some negativity comes out of you. Do you start writing about things you're grateful for, or do you start with asking questions like, you know, what would it take for me to have ease today? Or do you start thinking about, oh, I'm thankful that I woke up. I'm thankful for my espresso, you know, whatever it is you think. Do you do that? Do you go into gratitude?
So it's interesting because, like, in my opinion, there's so many different like formats that one can use when they're journaling, and I believe that there are some that are very medicinal. You know, like I think any kind of writing is good, but I think it can also be counterproductive if you're not totally sure exactly like how to navigate through your journaling. And I have actually, like, in my journaling part of my book, I have multiple different ways of how to journal, like different types of journaling. So for me, I'll play around with all of those different types of journaling, but mainly what I'll start with is I always address I like to think of it as a dialogue, like I'm almost like writing out my conversation with God, you know, or spirit, you know, or angels, or whatever I'm feeling inspired to talk to that day, universe. And I'll just kind of start to do kind of a check-in, you know, like here's how I'm feeling this morning, and kind of this is what's going on. And sometimes that feels good for me to just like get it out on the page, you know, and just sort of like release it. But a lot of times what will happen is, especially if I'm writing all about the things that I'm worried about or that are kind of hard at the moment, I'm like, ugh, this isn't helping. You know, this doesn't really feel great. Sometimes it's helpful, but then it's like, what I know will be helpful is like, I want to align with possibility. You know, I want to align with the solution. I want to align with the things that feel like really expansive, you know, which are like the vibrations of love and gratitude and acceptance and compassion and all of that. So I think for those of us who are a little more familiar with journaling, it's easier to do that, you know, to kind of just like pull from these different methods. And so sometimes I'll go right into gratitude. Sometimes I'll go right into access consciousness. It depends. So I think, especially for people who are maybe new at this, I think a great way to start is literally just a free flow of writing. So like you said, you have access to your dreams, you know, and a lot of people receive messages in their dreams. Like, we don't get taught to really acknowledge these gifts, you know, in these ways that we get communication and information. Like in fact, we get taught the opposite, like to dismiss it, you know, but the more we don't dismiss it, the more we see how powerful it is. So when you write in the morning, it's like everybody has to pee when they wake up, right? I mean, it's kind of like the first thing you're like, oh, I gotta go pee. So you have to empty your bladder, you know, and it's like, you've got to empty your mind as well. So it just gives you 3 pages to just like mentally vomit onto the page, purge it all out, get it out so that you don't have to take it with you, you know, into the day. You don't have to take all that negative chatter, because we all have it, you know, we all have it. You can just bleh onto the page and be like, yeah, I'm willing to actually feel differently about this day. And then you can move on. And that's why I like to kind of close it out with the gratitude practice, because that'll shift my attention to. And I used to think gratitude was so cheesy and stupid. Like when I first was learning about it, I was like, people were like, yeah, you know, write about like how grateful you are that the grass is green and the sky is blue. And I was like, whatever, it's supposed to be like that. Why would I be grateful if it's supposed to be like that's a sense of entitlement, you know, like taking for granted. And the more I would do this practice, it got to the point where one day I was holding my pen in my hand, and I had like these like old pajamas on, but I was like in my apartment in LA and just looked around and started to cry. Like, I was so thankful for the pen in my hand, for the raggedy pajamas I was wearing, for my like bedroom, because it was all mine, you know. And I was like seeing that like how much it had taken me to get to that moment right there. And I was like, oh my God, this is what people are talking about. But I had to do that over and over again. And kind of like until I really had that experience, you know? So I think this is why it's so important for people to remember that it's a practice. You're not going to have this big aha thing happen every single time. And it's not about what happens this time. It's about what happens over time. You know, we do it and we do it and we do it. And it creates this momentum in our lives and this vibration over time. So to just remember that, you know, that it's how we show up over time that matters.
Yeah, that's great. You know, one of the things I really like about you is that you're very authentic. You're very genuine. You talk about, it's easy to talk about hardships that you've had in the past, but you also talk about things that you're currently struggling with, fears that you currently have and whatnot. Have you always been that way? You know, my speech was actually about being authentic and sharing struggles in the present tense, and how that opens others up to sharing with you, and it creates connection. Have you always been a natural at that, or is this something new for you? Because I noticed that you definitely demonstrate this.
Well, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. I feel like that was always who I was, but I think that what had happened, you know, just through my younger years is like you kind of learn, I don't know, to put on that mask, you know, to, you know, that people, I think too, we just shifted out of an very old paradigm of leadership where it had to be kind of like this pedestal type of leadership where I think even us as students wanted our teachers to be perfect. Like there was something about their imperfection that made it hard to receive their message. But that has changed. That has really changed. And I think what started to happen was we'd be like not relating. Like, okay, it's easy for you because you don't have this life of these challenges. Like I need to talk to somebody who's actually got real life challenges. And I know for me, trying to be that sort of leader or teacher on a pedestal was so exhausting for me because I felt like I had to kind of edit myself, and I felt like I couldn't really connect to people because I was sort of playing a role. Like I was playing, it wasn't. So what would happen is I would be really inconsistent, with my sharing and stuff, and I would burn out. And then I started to ask the question of like, actually, I had gone down to South America, to Peru, and did some work with some shaman down there, and it came through in the ceremony that it was time for me to be more authentic. Like it was time for me to really tell people the truth of what was going on. And I'll tell you, like it's been a journey because even though that, knowing it and actually doing it is two different things because it's scary. It's scary. And then you're like, there's kind of an art form to it too. Like it's not just like vomit on everybody your problems, but it's more like, how can we share what's going on with everybody from a place of, curiosity and lightness and just relatability. So I'm still exploring that, to be honest. Like that's why I appreciate, that you acknowledge me for that, because it's still something I definitely am working on for sure, of how can I be even more authentic? How can I share even more? Because I definitely know that I still hold back,
Yeah, well, I think people are just craving authenticity. Everything's gotten so phony, Everybody's always putting their best foot forward, and, you think everybody's living these happy, fantastic lives, and that's not the case at all. So it's a breath of fresh air when someone like you comes along and talks about things they're currently struggling with. You're not up on that pedestal. You're leading by example at that point. And I think that's what people crave. I love it. I can't wait till your book comes out. I'll be one of your first customers. I see really big things for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I really appreciate you coming on the show today, and I'd love to have you back again sometime in the near future.
Yeah. I'd love to come back anytime. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate it. All right. That's it, everybody. Erin Lanahan. Erin, how can people find you?
Thank you for asking. ErinLanahanMethod.com. So just ErinLanahanMethod.com. And that's the best way to get me. All my social media stuff is there, and email and all that. So you just go to my website, www.ErinLanahanMethod.com, and that's the best way.
Perfect. ErinLanahanMethod.com. Erin, thank you so much for being here. I had a great time.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye for now.